Atoms synthesized in the interiors of stars are commonly returned to the interstellar gas. Red giants find their outer atmosphere blowing away into space. Planetary nebula are the final stages of sun-like stars blowing their tops. Supernova violently eject much of their stellar mass into space. The atoms returned are naturally those most readily made in the thermonuclear reactions in stellar interiors. Hydrogen fuses into helium, helium into carbon, carbon into oxygen, and thereafter, in massive stars, by the successive addition of further helium nuclei, neon, magnesium, silicon, sulfur, and so on are built, additions by stages, 2 protons and 2 neutrons per stage, all the way to iron. Direct fusion of silicon also generates iron. Pair of silicon atoms, each with 28 protons and neutrons, joining at a temperature of billions of degrees to make an atom of iron with 56 protons and neutrons. These are all familiar chemical elements. We recognize their names. Such stellar nuclear reactions do not readily generate erbium, hafnium, dysprosium, praseodymium, or yttrium, but rather the elements we know in everyday life. Elements return to the interstellar gas, where they are swept up in a subsequent generation of cloud collapse and star and planet formation. All the elements of the Earth, except hydrogen and some helium, have been cooked by a kind of stellar alchemy billions of years ago in stars, some of which are today inconspicuous white dwarfs on the other side of the Milky Way galaxy. The nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies, were made in the interiors of collapsing stars. We are made of star stuff. He'd found a small furnished house on Silmar Street. Saturday morning he moved in. He went around the neighborhood introducing himself. "Good morning," he said to the old man pruning ivy next door. "My name is Theodore Gordon. I just moved in." The old man straightened up and shook Theodore's hand. "How do?" he said. His name was Joseph Alston. A dog came shuffling from the porch to sniff Theodore's cuffs. "He's making up his mind about you," said the old man. "Isn't that cute?" said Theodore. Across the street lived Inez Farrell. She answered the door in a housecoat, a thin woman in her late 30s. Theodore apologized for disturbing her. "Oh, that's all right," she said. She had lots of time to herself when her husband was selling on the road. "I hope we'll be good neighbors," said Theodore. "I'm sure we will," said Inez Farrell. She watched him through the window as he left. Next door, directly across from his own house, he knocked quietly because there was a night worker sleeping sign. Dorothy Backus opened the door, a tiny withdrawn woman in her middle 30s. "I'm so glad to meet you," said Theodore. Next door lived the Walter Mortons. As Theodore came up the walk, he heard Bianca Morton talking loudly to her son, Walter Jr. "You are not old enough to stay out till 3 o'clock in the morning," she was saying, "especially with a girl as young as Catherine McCann." Theodore knocked, and Mr. Morton, 52 and bald, opened the door. "I just moved in across the street," said Theodore, smiling at them. Patty Jefferson let him in next door. As he talked to her, Theodore could see through the back window her husband Arthur filling a rubber pool for their son and daughter. "They just love that pool," said Patty, smiling. "I'll bet they do," said Theodore. As he left, he noticed the vacant house next door. Across the street from the Jeffersons lived the McCanns and their 14-year-old daughter, Catherine. As Theodore approached the door, he heard the voice of James McCann saying, He's nuts. Why should I take his lawn edger just because I borrowed his lousy mower a couple of times?" "Darling, please," said Fay McCann. "I've got to finish these notes in time for the council's next meeting." "Just because Kathy goes out with his lousy son," grumbled her husband. Theodore knocked on the door and introduced himself. He chatted briefly with them, informing Mrs. McCann that he certainly would like to join the National Council for Christians and Jews. It was a worthy organization. "What's your business, Gordon?" asked McCann. "I'm in distribution," said Theodore. Next door, 2 boys mowed and raked, while their dog gamboled around them. "Hello there," said Theodore. They grunted and watched him as he headed for the porch. The dog ignored him. As under cover of departing day, slunk hunger-stricken Ramazan away. Once more within the potter's house, alone I stood, surrounded by the shapes of clay. Shapes of all sorts and sizes, great and small, that stood along the floor and by the wall, and some loquacious vessels were, and some listened perhaps, but never talked at all. Said one of them, surely not in vain my substance of the common earth was ta'en, and to this figure moulded, to be broke or trampled back to shapeless earth again. Then said a second, ne'er a peevish boy would break the bowl from which he drank in joy, and he that with his hand the vessel made will surely not in after wrath destroy. After a momentary silence spake some vessel of a more ungainly make. They sneer at me for leaning all awry. What? Did the hand then of the potter shake? Whereat some one of the loquacious lot, I think a Sufi pipkin, waxing hot. All this of pot and potter. Tell me then, who is the potter, pray? And who the pot? Why, said another, some there are who tell of one who threatens he will toss to hell the luckless pots he marred in making. Pish, he's a good fellow, and 'twill all be well. Well, murmured one, let whoso make or buy my clay, with long oblivion is gone dry, but fill me with the old familiar juice, methinks I might recover by and by. So while the vessels one by one were speaking, a little moon looked in that all were seeking, and then they jogged each other, brother, brother, now for the potter's shoulder not a creaking. Ah, with the grape my fading life provide, and wash the body whence the life has died, and lay me shrouded in the living leaf by some not unfrequented garden side, that even my buried ashes such a snare of vintage shall fling up into the air as not a true believer passing by, but shall be overtaken unaware. Friday, May the 2nd, 1941.
Yesterday, few incursions into the Reich, principally Hamburg and Wilhelmshaven. Damage slight. The English do not seem to be getting through in any strengths. Could this be a significant indication? Impossible to know, but it seems that England is in a worse situation than we think. The result of our latest raids are showing now. Malta bombed again. Our U-boats and planes are reporting big quantities of tonnage sunk. We can only hope that this continues, particularly in the case of the U-boat fleet. Little left in Greece but mopping up operations. The new government is beginning to establish itself. In North Africa, bitter fighting. Our fatal casualties for the entire southeastern campaign probably total no more than 800. The announcements of this figure during the Führer's speech will be a sensation. London is admitting heavy losses so far as its own troops are concerned, particularly in heavy equipment. But Churchill claims that we have an excess of this. In any case, he keeps quiet about the fact that the material is lost to him. Public opinion in the USA is still in a state of ferment. The isolationists are very active. Their success depends on what happens in the immediate future. The interview with the Duke of Windsor has, of course, been reprinted in a completely distorted form in the Popular d'Italia. But then, even in its original form, it has strongly defeatist undertones. We shall not use it, so as to avoid discrediting him. Food supply problems increasing in England. I give the press instructions on how they are to comment on our lowering of the meat ration. They are to lay particular emphasis on the fact that we ate much less meat during peacetime before the World War. The latest newsreel is quite magnificent. I order that copies be sent to the troops who appear in it. This is the least our soldiers are entitled to expect. Hinko reports on Hamburg and Kiel. We must do a lot more for Kiel, especially. The city must not feel that it has been deserted. To Lanke in the afternoon. What peace out here. I take a deep breath. The dust of Berlin is shaken from me. Here one is a human being. In the freedom of nature, spring is keeping us waiting out here. It is cold. The trees are grey and bare. Speak with Magda on the telephone. She and Ursel have arrived safely in Bischofsreisen. All the children are well. I really long for them. A drive through the forest, a whole lungful of fresh air. Wild rumours from Russia. They are slowly coming onto our trail, but there is so much lying going on that it is hard to distinguish fact from fiction. And at the moment,
that is the best thing, so far as we are concerned. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It had a perfectly round door like a porthole, painted green, with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened onto a tube-shaped hole like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel, without smoke, panelled walls and floors tiled and carpeted, provided with polished chairs and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The hobbit was fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly but not quite straight into the side of the hill. The hill, as all the people for many miles round called it, and many little round doors opened out of it, first on one side and then on another. Nowhere upstairs for the hobbit. Bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, lots of these. Wardrobes, he had whole rooms devoted to clothes. Kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor and indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left-hand side going in, for these were the only ones to have windows. Deep-set round windows looking over his garden and meadow beyond, sloping down to the river. The hobbit was a very well-to-do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. Bagginses have lived in the neighbourhood of the hill for time out of mind, and people considered them very respectable, but only because most of them were rich, but also because they never had any adventures or did anything unexpected. You could tell what a Baggins would say on any question without the bother of asking him. This is a story of how a Baggins had an adventure and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost the neighbours' respect, but he gained, well, you'll see whether he gained anything in the end. What is a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays since they have become rare and shy of the big people as they call us. They are, or were, a little people, about half our height, and smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. There is little or no magic about them, except the ordinary everyday sort which help them to disappear quietly and quickly when large, stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making a noise like elephants which they can hear a mile off. They are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress in bright colours, chiefly green and yellow, wear no shoes because their feet grow natural leathery soles, and thick warm brown hair like the stuff on their heads, which is curly, have long clever brown fingers, good-natured faces, and laugh deep fruity laughs, especially after dinner, which they have twice a day when they can get it. Now you know enough to go on with.